All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today as we take a look back at some of the consumer behavior trends we saw in 2020 and unpack which of those seem likely to stick around and which are likely to fade away. I'm Allison Phillips, Director of Marketing on Cox Media's corporate team, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Some quick housekeeping items before I introduce our guest speaker. Today's presentation is being recorded. You'll receive an email with the recording so you can watch it again at your convenience or share it with your teams. We have about 25 minutes of great content for you and 5 minutes set aside for Q&A. If at any time during the presentation you have a question, please type it into the question box on your screen and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. So now that that's out of the way, I'm really excited to introduce you all to today's guest speaker, Bill Day. So Bill is an experienced media executive who has spent the better part of the last 2 decades working in and with multimedia companies across the country. He currently leads the revenue strategy practice at Maggot, a firm that specializes in understanding human behavior and applying that insight to solve business challenges. Bill has some really thought-provoking content to share today that I think you're all going to enjoy. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to you, Bill.
Thanks, Allison, and thanks for all of you for carving out time to spend some time today with us. You know, it probably goes without saying that 2020 was a year of tremendous upheaval for all of us in our personal lives, for all of us as we've looked at the world around us, really trying to understand what's happening and the kinds of changes that have happened in your world and in your business. And what I hope to run through over the next 20 minutes or so is some of the research that we've been capturing here at Maggot about those behaviors, about which ones are likely to stick around, which ones are likely to shape your consumer's world in the coming weeks and months, and honestly, even years ahead. Before I dive in, let me take a couple of seconds and back up, tell you who we are. I'm with Maggot. We're a 65-year-old human-centered design firm. That means we spend all of our time at the other end of the marketing funnel from where most of you live. Instead of worrying about clicks and calls, instead of worrying about the last step in the marketing funnel, our team sits on the couch with consumers. We sit behind the wheel with consumers. We're there with them as they're consuming media to understand the way they feel about the world around them, to understand how they're interacting with ads and messages and the challenging environment that is marketing in 2021. We start there because we know that if we start there, it's easier to figure out how to get them to where you want them to go if you know where they're starting. We do this across every category of consumer behavior you can imagine, from the TV shows you watch to the food you eat to where you choose to vacation. I'm going to bring together a lot of that research that we've been doing here over the last couple of weeks into our research today, into our presentation today, to give you a sense of the way all of those trends are impacting consumers in ways that might surprise you. Our firm does this research. We hear from about 1 million consumers a year around the world, for everybody, including our friends here at Cox, but from folks from Sony to Snapple, from Facebook to Google, and really hundreds and hundreds of advertisers just like you. I'm going to pull from all of that research to give you a sense of 2020, what it's going to mean for you in 2021. So let's start with where consumers are and what you should do about it. The first and the biggest trend that we saw come out of 2020 that's likely to stick around for the foreseeable future is the importance of local. Local has become really important to consumers. And think about what your life has been like over the last 8 to 10 months. You probably have reduced your roam range. You know, that's the distance you travel on a daily basis, on a regular basis. I know I have. I normally spend about 100 days a year in airplanes flying all over the country, and I've spent the last year standing right here. Like consumers all over, I've seen real change in the way I interact with the world around me, right? But the local doesn't mean what we expect it to mean. It doesn't mean the same things to consumers that you might suspect. Let's start with Uber. Many of you might think of Uber as a digital company, as an app that lives on your phone. You might think of them as a billion-dollar Silicon Valley startup who's made a splash in disrupting established competitive landscapes like taxi cabs and limousine services all over the country. That's certainly true from a business model, but I'd challenge you. Think about Uber from a consumer's experience. Think about Uber from the consumer experience in 2020. Most consumers have experienced Uber as a physical experience, whether it's because they're driving for Uber to make ends meet in the middle of one of the worst economic calamities that the nation has faced, or whether they're using Uber as a customer to have Uber pick them up and bring them home from work or bring them home from the airport. For consumers, Uber is an inherently local experience. It's run by people who live in my town, delivering food to my door, picking me up from my favorite restaurant and taking me home. This is the essence of a local experience. Consumers have begun to experience local in ways that are disconnected from the traditional markers that we've often thought of as local. It doesn't mean just local ownership, it means access. It means the ability to have something delivered right to where I am, the ability to leverage my new way of life and have things come to me instead of me going to them. You can think about Grubhub in the same way. Grubhub's an app that lives on your phone, but it's an app that connects you to local drivers who will pick up your favorite tacos from your favorite restaurant and deliver them to your front door. They'll bring Chinese food to you. They'll connect you with the world around you. Blue Apron shows a lot of those exact same elements, right? It's doing the grocery shopping for you and then delivering that box of food to your front door, allowing you to stay local. It allows you to stay connected with the folks in your life, the folks in your home. I want to challenge you. Local doesn't mean what you might expect it to mean, and it will continue to evolve as 2020 continues. 43% of consumers in our most recent study told us that they are more likely to spend money on local. Local is important to them. They are prioritizing local, and that means a whole range of services. Instead of thinking about where something's owned or where something's physically located, think about how consumers can interact with it. One of the things we've seen is that as more and more consumers are working from home, the line between the real world and digital has disappeared. That many of them are doing what we're doing here right now. We're spending time on webinars. We're working out of our homes. We're using this as the core anchor point for our lives. As I mentioned before, let's reduce those roam rates. Consumers are traveling less. They're not driving by as many physical locations. So they're prioritizing ease and access and convenience, whether it's curbside pickup of Subway sandwiches or whether it's having their groceries delivered into the backseat of their car in front of their favorite grocery store. All of those services have reshaped their expectations about how they'll interact with your business, whatever your business is. We're seeing these trends in everything from legal to medical, all the way down to the quick service restaurants that I think most of us think of when we think of kind of the rise of these fast delivery and gig economy businesses. Local is incredibly important, but local is going to be driven by consumers' access, not by the traditional definitions of geography. Brands that are working to close that physical gap with free delivery and shipping and curbside pickup are going to win in 2021 and beyond. Brands that don't will be playing catch up and will find themselves disadvantaged in the new economy. Some of that is because of this working from home trend. Our research suggests that working from home isn't just something that was happening during the pandemic. It's something that's here to stay. This is really, really big. 53% of consumers told us that they are working from home at least part-time right now. And when we asked them to imagine what their life's going to look like in the future, 41% of consumers told us that they're going to continue working from home at least part-time going forward. This is significant. This is a really big deal. And the challenge I would offer to you is, have you thought through what this means to your business? If the plurality of consumers are working from home at least half the time, what does that mean? And what I would suspect is if you're like most of the folks that we work with, you've thought of it in your own terms. You've thought of it in terms of having your bookkeeper or your accountant work from home on Mondays and Fridays for the foreseeable future. If you're like most businesses, you've staggered staff in and out to reduce the number of folks in the door. You've embraced the flexible work time that's worked, and you're going to use that as a recruiting tool. All of those things are important, but I want you to think about what this is going to mean for consumers and the way consumers are going to engage with the economy around you. How many of you had a favorite lunch place in 2019? How many of you had a favorite lunch place that was near your office in 2019? And how many of you have been to that lunch place at any point over the last 10 months? What about a dry cleaner? What about a grocery store that was close to where you worked but wasn't convenient to where you lived? Think about all of the commuting patterns and how they have impacted and shaped your personal engagement with commerce. Those commuting patterns are likely to change forever, and so the commerce patterns are likely to change forever. That's going to mean a bunch of different things for different categories. For automotive, it's going to change the calculus that consumers make around the lease versus buy debate. That they may be more inclined to lease cars because they'll have fewer miles. They're going to be putting on fewer miles every year because they're not going to be commuting as often. It's going to shape questions around vehicle size. That consumers who are no longer commuting as often might choose to buy the larger truck, right? Because that may actually fit in with a new typical use case. Instead of thinking of my car primarily as a vehicle to get me to and from work, my vehicle might primarily become a way to get to and from my lake house. It may primarily be a tool for me to tow my camper or tow the trailer with the boat or the water vehicles or the horses or whatever toys there are that are important to me, because I'm able to do that more often in a flexible work environment. And then, of course, there's the idea of service frequency. If I'm driving less, I will just need less maintenance done on my vehicles, or maybe I'm going to need different maintenance done on different schedules. All of those will fundamentally reshape the way consumers engage with the automotive space, on the lease and buy, on the servicing, and really on the vehicles they pick. The vehicles they pick is going to tie right into what happens with travel and leisure. Our research tends to support the idea that going forward, consumers are going to have more frequent and shorter vacations. That with flexible work, that means they're going to be able to go to the lake house more often. They're going to be able to go camping more often. They're going to be able to go down to the beach for long weekends, leave after work on a Thursday, work from the beach house all day Friday, and then spend the weekend there with their kids and come back Monday after work. That new change in behavior will impact some businesses. Some businesses, destination travel locations, places like Disney World and Disneyland, all of the other key big anchor travel points around the country may see a decline in travel. They may see some compression against their ability to drive rates. The inverse of that is true. Places like the Ozarks and the Smoky Mountains, places like the Poconos or the Outer Banks on the coast of North Carolina might actually see an increase in visitors. They might see an increase in demand because more people will be able to go there more often. If we tie this back to the automotive, you can see where these two things will play against each other. That many of these consumers might choose to get a camper or an RV, that they might choose to begin mountain biking or kayaking. All of those pieces will fit together and reinforce each other. Because the challenge here is if you buy a camper or if you choose to buy an SUV so you can go mountain biking more often, this reinforces the decision you're making, locking you into that lifestyle choices going forward. We touched a little bit on what restaurants look like in the first segment of this. A real shift from eating out to eating in, a real shift from eating out to cooking in and delivery services. That's going to have real impact on grocery and consumer packaged goods as well. Groceries had a really interesting year from a marketing standpoint. Our research points to the fact that consumers have spent more money on average at the grocery store, that they've visited grocery stores far more often, but that their loyalty to individual grocery stores has plummeted. Same thing with their loyalty to individual brands inside that grocery store. Some of that was driven by supply. You guys will remember the historic toilet paper shortage of 2020 that preceded all of the craziness that we had. Some of that was driven by boredom. When you have less options for entertainment, things like experimenting with new ways to cook and cooking with new ingredients become an interesting way for consumers to keep themselves engaged. I'm sure many of you got sourdough starter kits from friends who decided that bread baking was one of the best ways that they could entertain themselves. Our research suggests a good amount of that behavior is here to stay, that we've seen a real shift away from eating out, that the number of visits out, the amount of money spent out, and the frequency of eating out is likely to remain depressed through 2021. And that cooking in with all of the pieces that go around that is likely to be accelerated during 2021 and beyond. That gives lots of opportunities for brands who want to play in those spaces. And of course, it means there's a challenge for those of you in the restaurant space. You're going to need to work to convince consumers to re-engage with you. And this is certainly be a challenging time for restaurants, but we're going to have to get creative about finding ways to get consumers to come back out and begin visiting their favorite restaurants at a higher and more frequent basis. Last but certainly not least in this category, I want you to think about what exercise, technology, and recreation look like as they mix together. The easiest and clearest example of this, of course, is Peloton. Peloton takes all three of those things and pushes them together. You don't need to go to the gym because the technology allows the gym to come to you. And you don't need to go meet your running friends or your cycling friends because you can meet them there in this virtual world. Peloton is a great way of thinking about the encapsulation about what happens around consumers as they begin to adopt these behaviors. Peloton locks consumers in for a long period of time. Other national brands have begun pursuing similar business models. The open question here is how should local specialty gyms and large gyms respond to this trend? How do local businesses who sell recreational equipment, whether it's bikes or kayaks, whether it's boats or water sports, use this to their advantage? There's some real sea changes happening here over the course of the next 6 months that will define business and business space for the next generation or so. A lot of interesting stuff to happen in the exercise, technology, and recreational intersection there. Flexible work schedules, drive time destinations, long weekend holidays are going to be important in 2021, and likely the decisions consumers make in 2021 will shape their behavior for years to come. The last bit I want to touch on before we open the floor up here for questions is about the home services category. You know, our research suggests that 2020 may very well have been the world's biggest honey-do list. What that means, though, is that 2021 is going to be a more challenging environment for those of you in home services. You know, this time last year, pre-pandemic, pre-lockdown, pre-economic dislocation, consumers were considering spending money on home improvements. About 39% of consumers in our study in January 2020 told us that they were likely to spend money on home improvements. Those are consumers who on a scale of 1 to 5 said they were a 5. I'm going to spend money on home improvements. About 40% of consumers. Of course, the lockdown kicks in. Consumers are stuck at home. They're staring at walls that need to be painting. They're looking at garage doors that have been busted for a while, screens that fell off. And we saw a surge in business for home services companies. As we do this work around the country, we heard from many of you that you had the busiest year you ever had, that you had long wait lists and lots of incoming phone volume, higher than average closes for the quotes that were going out. But our research doesn't suggest that that's because demand increased. But this time last year, before all of the events of 2020, about 40% of consumers said they were going to have work done. And as we just did that survey again in January 2021, about 40% of consumers tell us they're likely to have work done on their home. It turns out that 40% remained incredibly constant in our bi-weekly research throughout 2020. Every other week, we ran a survey, we were asking consumers, and every other week, about 40% of consumers said, yeah, I'm thinking about having work done on our home. In other words, while the business went up, the wallet share did not. It's not as if more consumers are investing more money into their homes. Instead, the research we have suggests that some consumers pulled ahead work that would have ordinarily been done at a different point in the year. That some consumers pulled ahead work that would have been done maybe this year or next year. What that suggests to us, what that suggests in the research, is that those of you in the home services space are going to have to work harder this year to keep consumers engaged. In order to maintain even your historic level of business, you're likely going to have to work harder to fill that demand pipe by giving consumers access to deals and accessibility language. And those are two different things. It's not that they want a discount. It's not that they need things that are inexpensive. You're going to need to signal to them that they have a way of affording and accessing your services. Our research points to a coming economic crunch as stimulus money dries up, as consumers begin to struggle with the full impact of the economic impact of 2020. We know that some of this is going to dry up. We know that some of the 2020 home services money came out of travel and leisure spending. That didn't happen. Obviously, as businesses are able to open up in 2021, those dollars are going to shift. We're going to want to think about how do you rethink your positioning to maintain momentum in the year to come in the face of a really challenging economic environment for consumers. And that's the last thing I want to leave you with as we come in towards a wrap up here of our short half hour together, which is our research is suggesting that consumers remain concerned with the COVID virus, that they remain concerned with the health challenges out there, that they want to see your employees wearing masks in any and all commercials that they see out there, whether they're on air or online or on the side of the road, that consumers remain concerned about messages about how they can access you. But the number one message for the last 10 weeks in our survey have been about deals and discounts and accessibility. That this economic message for consumers has taken real primacy of place in their mind as they've struggled with how do they deal with all of the challenges that they've been faced with in 2020, the impact it's had on their economy, the impact that it's had on the businesses they run, and what do they do going forward. We're going to continue to track that. We're going to continue to get more information here and hope that as the vaccine comes online, as more and more consumers have access to that vaccine and we begin to see the economy opening up because of that, we hope to see some of that economic constraint lift and those consumers begin to relax and move forward. Allison, I think we've got a couple of minutes here for time, for questions rather. I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me, and happy to take any questions you guys might have.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. It's really interesting to see how some of those pandemic-driven consumer behavior changes can't always be taken at face value, that often there's a little bit more going on behind the scenes, or there's kind of an undercurrent that's indicating whether they'll have staying power or not. So super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. And like Bill said, we do have a few minutes for some questions. If you have a question you'd like to ask, just go ahead and submit it through the question box on your screen. And I can see that we have a couple already. All right, so Bill, the first one, how has the pandemic impacted consumers' spending habits? Are they saving more, spending more?
That's a great question. We've been tracking that from really the earliest hours of the pandemic. And so I think we're, I don't know, 32 weeks into this, if we're counting this. What we've seen is that overall, that consumers have pulled back on their spending, that they are definitely attempting to save more. We see a range of success in that. You all are certainly familiar with kind of the bifurcated nature of our economy, that there are folks who did really well last year. There was some real wins on the stock market, not including GameStop. But there were some real wins on the stock market. The high end of the economy has done a really good job of saving. The lower end of the economy has been struggling a bit more. Overall, there's a pullback. We can tell you that there's a sense of pent-up demand, that as we ask consumers in our study what they think they're going to do going forward, they're ready to start spending. They're ready to start spending once two things happen. Once their income rebounds, that means the lockdown's over, that businesses begin to return back to normal hours, income, and operating levels, and that they can go out, that there are consumers still in lots of the country who are either in self-isolation or are still under significant shutdown orders where they live, which has been constraining their spending capacity.
Okay. Next question is, what is better going forward? Telling consumers in their advertising what we plan to do or what we have already done?
That's a good question. I'm guessing this is a question around what you plan to do about keeping people safe. What I would say is the interesting thing about COVID and COVID precautions is that consumers were really interested in them. They were really high value messaging in just only 5 weeks right after all of this broke. And very quickly, consumers said, okay, enough. Okay, enough. And so what we see inside our research, including in testing specific ads, is that there's a base level of information that consumers want from you, and after that, they really don't want it. So what I would encourage you to do is to think about making sure that you're delivering just enough message that's telling consumers you're keeping them safe. right? And those include using quarantine pods. That means showing families together without masks in ways where they are isolated from other people. That means showing your employees using masks, and that includes using reasonable safety precautions for whatever your industry is. Every industry's kind of got some different standards. You want to think those through. I would focus on what you're doing, not on what's getting ready to come. We have not answered the question yet about what vaccinations are going to mean. That is an open question. Will consumers gravitate towards home services providers who advertise that all of their staff are vaccinated? Will the health laws in your state even allow you to do that? That's kind of up in the air right now as we work that through. We're tracking that though, and we'll have updates for that as the year rolls on. Only about 9% of people in our surveys right now report having gotten the vaccine, so it's still a really small number of consumers as late as last week as we pulled that data.
Yeah, so, and that was kind of the next question is if you expect consumer spending to increase or decrease as things begin opening up as the vaccine rolls out. I would imagine that the thought process is that we hope consumer confidence increases, right? And that their wallets start opening a little bit more. Is that what you're seeing?
That's what we're seeing. So we're asking a variety of questions right now in our tracking studies around the vaccine. Let's start with the good news. 91% of consumers say they feel good about the vaccine process, about the vaccine rollout, and about the information they have on the vaccine. That's good news. We still see some reluctance in consumers who are concerned about whether or not they will personally get the vaccine. We see some real concern about the pace of the vaccine rollout and kind of the mechanics of how it actually works. There's obviously significant variance in those feelings by state. So we see those regional differences show up. What we do know, though, is that consumers are ready to get back. They're ready to re-engage. And so any forward-looking questions we ask them in our research, we see that these consumers are eager. They're eager to get back out there and re-engage with the economy broadly. I guess my caution, I hope what you all took from our 30 minutes today, is what they think is not the same as what they're going to do. That there are things that they've learned in 2020 that they really like. They like the fact that they can work from home 2 days a week and have sweats on and knock out a bunch of conference calls and still be productive. People have liked that. They like the fact that they have access to all kinds of services that allow them to manage their life better. That means having groceries delivered to their doorstep. They like that. That's not a pandemic issue. That's a lifestyle issue. It may be something they discovered in 2020 because of the lockdown, but just because they can go back out doesn't mean they will go back out. And so the challenge for each of you as you think about your brand is how do you take advantage of those changing consumer behaviors so that your brand wins and doesn't wind up as one of the ones who's going to suffer the long-term effects of 2020?
Yeah, we're getting so many good questions. I'm going to put Bill on the spot and ask him to follow up with me on some of these others, and we'll create a blog post around them. But I do want to close with one last question that kind of caught my eye, and we'll get all of these other questions that you guys have asked answered and make sure that we share them with you. But last question for you, Bill, is there an industry that you, based on your research, that you think will see, huge growth during this pandemic, or as the pandemic evolves? And then on the flip side, what industry do you see might have the biggest opportunity to reinvent themselves in this current environment?
Yeah, so I think any industry, and I kind of touched on this, I think any industry that's going to empower consumers to have a more flexible work-life integration, right? And this is a whole other 30 minutes, but the buzzword for years has been this idea of work-life balance. When do I turn on and turn off? What we see is that consumers, investing in class companies, pursue something closer to work-life integration. And so think about what the flexible work environment is going to mean for consumers. Think about all the ways that's going to impact them. I think there's a huge upside for brands and companies that engage in that space. So that's everybody from RV parks and RV trailers to auto manufacturers who are going to help them do that. I think that entire space is going to be is ripe for innovation. It's ripe for growth. Same thing with travel destinations, right? There are going to be travel destinations who are going to set themselves up and say, we're a good place for work from home or remote working. They're going to find ways to change their business rules. So think about the way most business rental or most vacation rentals have happened around the country. They have been Saturday to Saturday or Sunday to Sunday. Well, that doesn't make sense for folks who have flexible work schedules. So which brands are going to move quickest? Which locations are going to move quickest to move to a Thursday to Tuesday rental window, right? So that they can fill themselves up more often. There's going to be lots of opportunity there. I think that the inverse of that is if you think about the traditional travel, hospitality, and leisure space, they're going to be challenged. That the idea of saying I'm going to spend $5,000 on a vacation with my 4 kids, this is the one time a year I do it, we're all going to load up in the car and drive for 2 days, or we're all going to jump on an airplane, we're going to go somewhere and we're going to have a set piece experience. I think on balance, if you were asking me to predict, the set piece travel experience goes down, the more frequent travel experience goes up, and dollars get shifted in those 2 directions. I think what that means is that Disney World loses and local bike shops can win. I think that's one of those unusual patterns in the economy that we're going to see over the next 3 or 4 years. That's not necessarily intuitive.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks again, Bill, and that's all the time we have for today, but as a quick reminder, a recording of today's webinar will be emailed to you, so be on the lookout for that. And we'll be back in May with another guest expert and some more great content. So we hope you'll be able to join us again then. In the meantime, check out our blog for articles, ebooks, and recordings of some of our previous Ask the Experts webinars. And as always, for any additional questions regarding today's content, contact your Cox Media consultant. If you're not a current customer, you can visit us at coxmedia.com to connect with one of our media experts. So thank you all again, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And thank you again, Bill, for the great information. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Allison.